Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to the presidential seminar series that we broadcast from Purdue University. And as you all know, the CIB World Building Congress is going to be organized at Purdue University from May 19th to the 23rd this year. And so in our approach to the World Building Congress, where we're expecting anywhere from 600 to 800 participants from all over the world, we have introduced this panel series where we will bring forward experts from all over the world to discuss about some of the key issues and matters that would reflect upon what is the role of the built environment community in addressing the UN Sustainable Development Goals. As you can see from this slide, there are 17 SDGs or Sustainable Development Goals. And today we have put together an excellent panel to talk about architectural design trends and the Sustainable Development Goals. And so with us today, we have two distinguished speakers, Professor Silvio Melhado, and I'll give a brief introduction to his background. And then we have Professor Isaiku Rashid all the way from New Zealand. So let me give a brief introduction to both of our panelists. Dr. Silvio Melhado is a professor at ETS at University of Quebec, and he's also professor at the University of Sao Paulo in Brazil. He has expertise on the management systems implementation in the AEC sector, both in construction projects and in design offices. His current research addresses the innovation in project and design management, contextualized by the evolution of management processes and practices towards sustainability and BIM requirements. His research work also includes topics on construction technology, construction management, risk management, engineering management, and the design execution interface management. He's a member of the International Council for Research and Innovation in Building and Construction, CIB, and currently is acting as the joint coordinator of CIB Working Commission W96. Professor Melhado has authored and co-authored over 350 research papers, as well as co-authored or edited 9 books and 20 book chapters. Our second panelist is Dr. Isaiku Rashid, and she is a senior lecturer in Sustainable Built Environment and CIB Student Chapter Academic Advisor at the School of Built Environment at Massey University in New Zealand. She obtained her bachelor's degree in architecture, second-class honors from Abia State University in 2005, her master's degree in project management from the University of Science in Malaysia in 2010, and a PhD in architecture from the University of Auckland in 2015. Her research is focused on the interface between sustainability and building performance. She investigates the relationships between building users' interaction, comfort, and productivity with building performance, including energy use, efficiency, facilities, systems, and indoor environment quality in both residential and commercial buildings. So please welcome our two panelists, Professor Silvio Melhado and Professor Rashid. Welcome. Who would like to start? Professor Melhado, would you like to take the first?
Yes, if you don't mind, I can do it.
Yeah, I don't. I just recalled we didn't discuss the schedule of presentation, whether you go first or you
just realized that too.
Fine? Okay. So thank you. So are you seeing my screen?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Okay. So I will be in the proposed 15 minutes, I guess, and after available for questions. So I guess everybody knows the UN Sustainable Development Goals. I will not try to explain it, is universal, is global, and is important, and it is a priority for the construction field to consider all those sustainable development goals. But what are the main current challenges for us? A lot of challenges affect the built environment, and we need to understand that the built environment only exists in the context of the economic, social, political, and technical issues. So some pictures that can be maybe a little bit shocking, but necessary to understand. Last year and even this year, we are having so many urban floods like this, and also city fires. Maybe you heard about Los Angeles, but it is happening in several other countries and cities. It's not new, but pollution, waste that comes from our consumption model, but also social issues. So, for example, these homeless people is in my city, São Paulo, Brazil, but we can see the kind of situation all over the world, I would say. The problem of gender inequality and gender violence, because this is a major issue in city centers, for example. The majority of cities has some episodes of violence that are not acceptable. Problems in education, if you see, but depends on the country, but the level of education is necessary for improved sustainability. We don't need to talk so much about, but the conflicts that are saying war, the destruction, everything that is happening. Immigration flows. Here, I have a picture that I hope will show some, good feelings, because sometimes they are much worse than this one. That is not so bad to see, but we have a lot of questions. That's true that we not be in charge of answer everything, but we need to consider these questions. We are talking about urban resilience. That's necessary because of these catastrophic events, because of climate change and everything that comes with. But is it really feasible? Are we really capable of doing the measures and making everything that is necessary? In our case, is the construction industry contributing to climate action, or is it contributing to climate change? I guess both. So another question, are you able to manage the urban environment already built? Because it's necessary to think about not only new construction. Could we stop designing buildings and think about the whole urban environment, not the individual buildings? Some ideas I can put in this debate about the reduction of inequalities through urban building design. We need to think about the design process, improve this design process. And this starts with adequate public policies, because we can't change how we design cities and buildings, all the urban environment. If you don't have the public policies that really make people to think about and to propose solutions to sustainable construction. But it may be there are some limitations in terms of economics, of course, must be considered. Which are the priorities, and of course, it's a long-term planning that we are talking about. It's not something that it will be, I would say, in 2025 till 2030 kind of thing. No, it's something that we need to start and go on. Needs a systemic, very systemic and multidisciplinary work. Is something that is not engineering or architecture or construction professionals that are capable of solve everything that is needed to the design process. And of course, now we are going to a digital concurrent approach, which means some of the improvement of technology that can help us to improve processes, improve practices, and improve design. So that's my idea of the approach that we need to consider to the design process, even urban and building design, because we have to think that the design process will be a result of four main approaches. One is people, of course, the professionals, but also the users, clients, all the stakeholders involved. We have technology, but the technology must be seen as the means for the improvement and not the solution itself. Also, you have people that have processes that you need to improve, because our processes are still very traditional ones. Even if we are evolving, progressing, using new tools, new technologies, the processes that didn't change really in its core, culture of how we are doing, how we are managing things. So management is the fourth one that we need to consider. The way that he used to manage need to change too. We talk a lot of AI now, so artificial intelligence implementation is something that everybody is committed with, but this should arrive alongside people and process evolution, not only, some, specific tools that improve specific tasks. For example, this kind of generative AI that can accelerate some tasks is good, but will be not enough to arrive to the the sustainable design that we are talking about. And the third one that I would say is very promising is the improvement of the management of life cycle costs, because we talk about life cycle impacts, but what is of powerful, I would say, as an instrument to the changes is the cost approach, when we are capable of design something that has a improve the performance, but is economically feasible. We published recently a book, this one, Architectural Design Management in Digital Age, with Bob Gaddens and Jenny Barrett. We have a lot of contributors, so many other colleagues that wrote 13 main chapters. Some of chapters are directly related to the subject of this session, but some others, even if it's not, for example, if you talk about the reality of online or face-to-face today, that is a general question. This affects also the results of the design because it's a cultural issue that we are going through, and we need to talk about, we need to understand, we need to improve. A lot of other subjects can be also interesting to know and to read. So thank you for your audience. We are expecting you in the CIB WBC World Building Congress that will be at Purdue, promoted by our colleague Mark and all the team. So do not miss the sessions and workshops that will be planned during our World Building Congress. Thank you so much. And of course, we continue, and I will be available for questions, everything.
Thank you, Professor Melhado. That was a really good introduction and opening statement to the topic of discussion. Let's hold on the questions for now, as we have set aside time for Q&A after Professor Rashid has made her statement and presentation. So with that said, Iziaku, please take over.
Thank you. I'll just share my screen. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Awesome. So yeah, thank you very much. Sorry, I think where my screen is, I can't see the audience, so I just hope I'm catching your attention with my presentations. That's just imagining. Yeah, so thank you so much, Silvio, for the introductory presentation that sets the pace for what I will be discussing or introducing in my own part. So for my own session, I'm mainly focusing on inclusivity and how inclusivity contributes or impacts on the ability of the construction industry or the built environment to achieve the SDGs. So before I start, just want to shed a little bit of light on where I'm coming from. So I'm part of a CIB task group 125. I think we're one of the newest task groups that have been formed under CIB. And we're made up of people from academics and researchers from various institutions that have come together, seeing the need for us to discuss and bring our diverse and different ideas and research work and case studies together to tackle this issue of providing an inclusive built environment for everyone. Our task group objectives are mainly based on the SDG 11, being able to provide sustainable cities and communities for everyone. We're on LinkedIn, so you can check us out on LinkedIn, and we will be at WBC 2025 this year. So for me to start talking about inclusivity, inclusivity is, affects every one of us. It affects you, it affects me, it affects various diverse groups that are in the built environment. Inclusivity has a center stage when it comes to addressing particular SDGs We cannot achieve SDGs, in particular, there's 4 SDGs that are on the screen, without us looking into and addressing the issue of inclusivity in everything that is done in the built environment, and especially in construction industry, because most of the activities we do affect people and have most times direct impact on the ability of everyone to achieve their basic needs. On this slide here, I have listed particular groups, diverse groups, that are mainly focused on when the issue of inclusivity comes up. And that has to do with disabled people, which is the most common idea you get when you talk about inclusivity. Older adults, not necessarily migrants. Then we have our dependents, the little kids, pregnant moms, and then neurodiverse individuals. And also recently, there's been a good focus on low-income earners in the society. So the reason for inclusivity is not because it sounds trendy or it sounds good, but it has detrimental impact when it is not well managed on not just the built environment, but the world's population itself. And that's because about 15%, put up some statistics here for us to have a visual or a mental idea of why inclusivity is important. Many and more individuals in the built environment have disability, and them having disability means they are not able to achieve what other people will achieve in the built environment, and that has more impact on assessing buildings, using the buildings, and being able to interact with the buildings or public spaces they use. Statistics also tells us that about 80 people living with disabilities are mainly found in developing countries. And the problem with this is the place or the area where there is a more frequent lack of inclusive infrastructures that affects or poses challenges to them in participating in the industry or in society. And by 2050, more of our population, and in this case, 60%, will be known as older adults, which means they would have lived up to 65 years old and above, and now needing assistance and a different form of accessibility to buildings and open spaces. At the same time, too, in the next 25 years, more of the world's population would have moved from rural areas to urban areas, also putting more attention to the limited resources we have in our urban cities. And when it comes to developing countries, many of the cities experience overcrowding, which puts so much pressure on the housing, causing housing shortages, and also the amenities and, let's say, public transportation that are available in those countries. I just put this out because you might be interested to know what is the New Zealand situation. So New Zealand has about 5 million population, and it will interest you that about 1.5 of these people are migrants coming from different parts of the world. And coming also being a migrant means you come with your own cultural expectations and also socioeconomic limitations to a new country, and that poses challenges to you as a migrant in being able to function properly in the built environment where you found yourself. So in other words, these statistics are not just numbers, but they give or they highlight the fact that inclusive practices or inclusive strategies in the built environment is becoming more and more important for us to have a more a workable built environment where everyone can function. So for this presentation, I will be focusing mainly on buildings. That's the spaces where we live in, where we work in, where we mostly interact with people, and where we spend about 80 to 90% of our time throughout our lifetime. So before I can say what I want to say, I found this video on YouTube, which I wanted to play. That gives us kind of a mental picture and a visual picture of what the world would look like if the case was reversed. And I hope you can.
Hello, I'd like to open a bank account. One is the loneliest number that you'll ever do. Two can be as bad as one. It's the loneliest number since the number one. It's for everyone. When your world lights up.
Thank you. So that is a situation where the reverse is the case, and the majority of the world population that do not have disabilities, lack access to basic amenities. And this is a situation where the world is made for disabilities. And it kind of gives you a mental picture of how it would feel if the reverse was the case and you were the one who do not have access to live your life in a conducive way. So when it comes to inclusivity, I will mainly focus on three aspects, and that's the well-being of occupants. That's people who use buildings often, how the ability, how accessible our buildings are for people. And when it comes to equity, do we all have what we need to interact with our buildings properly? And do our buildings designed and constructed in such a way to give us what we need to function every day? So as the world is getting more globalized, it will be difficult to find any country where there are not migrants, where there are not neurodiverse people, where there are not older adults, where the world is becoming very much diverse with different groups of people who have their different needs that need to be satisfied. So the traditional or the conventional paradigm or solution where we provide a one-size-fits-all solution was no longer possible. And also because we're in this era of global interconnectedness where people want to interact with each other and do not want any barriers that's stopping them from interacting with people, irrespective of the kind of disability or whatever their conditions might be. So we need a solution that acknowledges the unique experiences and challenges and futures and characteristics of different groups of people in order to provide a workable and sustainable built environment. And that is why I like the idea of inclusivity, but inclusivity begins to look into those areas of meeting people's needs that are not common, that are not the 90% or the 80%, but identify those needs and provide for them, and in this case, in our building designs. So I would pick out these three aspects of inclusivity and kind of mention some of the few challenges that we face every day with our buildings. The most common one, which we all know when we talk about inclusivity, is accessibility to houses or to buildings, especially for uh, um, disabled people, the kids, and so on. One of the most common one is the landing for wheelchair users, which is usually very short in most houses. Most houses are not necessarily designed for diverse users. They're usually client specific, which poses challenges when there is a change in use or change in ownership of these private residential buildings. Um, Another very common one is that in most public spaces, you find out that, especially if the staircases are attached to a wall, the stair wall, you would notice that they only have one handrail. While for the other individuals, it poses no problem because you can hold on one hand and climb up the stairs. For an older adult, that depends on a walking stick. You would imagine the difficulty the person would have having to hold on to climb up the stairs. We also have things like disabled or disability toilets that are only made for one type of diverse group, which is just the wheelchair owners. People with like arthritis or have some medical conditions might not even be able to use those toilets, even though they fall under the disabled people's group. We also have issues like this one is very much common in public spaces where you find out that the accessible entrance is at the back of the building, which means it kind of gives this social stratification, like not including, people with who are disabled are not do not feel included because their own access they're given a separate access into the building. And then another one I will touch on is wash bins or wash hand basins. In public spaces, you hardly find those that are made for kids. So several times, I've had to go with my kids into some public spaces and they trying to climb, the normal wash hand basins to wash their hands and so on. And also when it comes to the safety and emergency preparedness in buildings, how many of them consider the blind, consider the deaf? They are just made for the normal individuals. Okay, so now when it comes to well-being, well-being is kind of a place that is a bit debatable, mainly because when it comes to occupants and individuals, our expectations and our futures differ. Very often, what could be a comfortable space for client A or for occupant A might not be for occupant B. And with all the debate that's going on energy efficiency, climate change, providing comfort, green buildings, expectations, and so on, usually the inclusivity tends to be left behind when trying to achieve energy efficiency in buildings, as well as achieving occupant comfort. These days, what I notice is there seems to be a kind of a one solution for all, where buildings are made to be airtight, and then they depend on mechanical systems to filter the air and provide a good indoor environment quality for people. However, we tend to forget that comfort is not a one size fits all, and has this graph where it moves up, it moves down. So people actually need the ability to interact more with the indoor space. However, with the kind of buildings we have now, the control has been taken away from occupants and even much more from people who are disabled when it comes to manipulating or interacting with their spaces. A typical example is just the ability for the disabled to open the windows in their space and to close it when they need to. That becomes a bit of a challenge. Another one I will talk about here is also the furniture and layout preferences in spaces like office buildings. Some of them do not capture the needs of the disabled in their midst, or even the future needs of the disabled in the buildings. Then the third one is equity. So when it comes to inclusivity and the topic of equity, I've noticed that there seems to be some aspects of equity that is swept under the carpet, and more of the bigger one of housing affordability, providing access, to buildings for migrants and so on. But when it comes to the design of buildings, we tend to think that when people move from one place to the other, they automatically are expected to adopt or assimilate the living preferences or the living expectations of where they come into. We tend to forget that when people move into a place, into another country, they come with them with their own cultural expectations, their own preferences, even their own demographic characteristics that influences their comfort and their ability to interact well in their buildings. I have listed some of them here, and one is the lack of multi-generational houses. Most migrants that come from developing countries, have this expectation and cultural connection to multi-generational houses, which is different from people in could be different from the housing situation in the developed world. So that causes a bit of a mismatch with what they would expect their buildings to give. A typical example is when it comes to the kitchen design of buildings for cooking. Being a woman myself, I appreciate a living space that is separate from the kitchen. And if you move from a developing country to a developed country, you tend to realize that that is not the case. Um, I think the trend now is open living space, that creates more accessibility, more space for people to interact. However, when it comes to cultural needs, those spaces tend to not function well for migrants. We also have a common issue in office spaces, providing opportunities and spaces where people can practice their cultural beliefs or their religious beliefs, without intruding in other people's ability to practice theirs or not. Um, we conducted a bit of a survey of office workers in New Zealand here, and then we wanted to ask about, the significance and importance of having religious spaces in office spaces. And it will interest you that, people, especially in the developed world, amongst demographic, the people who had more of European affiliations versus people who had more of a developing country affiliations, there were differences in their expectation or in their perception when it comes to the need for religious provisions in office spaces. The same thing with gender sensitive designs. There is now a move towards gender neutral designs, especially for our conveniences, toilets, and so. However, there are still people who need or who require their privacy and would prefer gender sensitive designs. And I could talk more about cultural perception as well as housing affordability. I was once having a conversation in a panel group, and one of the panel members made this comment, and the person said, there is this common ideology or perception that any migrant that comes into the country is poor and is looking for the lowest and the poorest, the lowest quality houses that are available. And it's kind of and then most landlords will think, oh, she's a migrant, he's a migrant, and then they are provided with really poor living situations. However, the panelists then was argued that some migrants do not necessarily come, poor, and they actually have their own expectations of buildings that should be considered when, they decide to have these houses. Okay, so the next, I'm about to end. The main thing I want to talk about here is what is the role of design buildings, building designs, architecture, when it comes to solving this problem of inclusivity. Recent years, there has been this move to universal designs. Universal designs that create like a one solution that is usable. It's functional for everyone. The universal design is usually an approach that tends to reduce any adaptations or retrofits or specialized solutions. And it's expected that about 80 to 90% of clients or occupants or users will be satisfied with this. But inclusivity argues that universal design is not sufficient on its own. Inclusive design is required. Now, we can't just do only inclusive design, because if we have inclusive design, the reality or the practicality of having a building at the end of the day will be zero to none. But when we combine inclusive designs and universal designs, we tend to have a solution that is workable. The good thing is that it becomes adaptable, it becomes flexible, in that the needs, because inclusivity recognizes the fact that the needs of occupants changes with time. And so it could change anytime. And when the change is needed, the retrofitting the house or changing the features of the buildings to meet the current occupants will not be a problem. It has more of a human-centered approach that looks more inwards than outwards, identifying the specific needs of all the diverse occupants, current and future, in the building. And that is why post-occupancy evaluation has been very useful and beneficial when it comes to inclusive designs, based on the building performance research and audits of past buildings. We can learn from it and design future buildings that are more inclusive, providing or acknowledging the wide range of users' needs and so on. And it also encourages the active identification of any issues or challenges to various users in the building, and then removes the barrier. So as I wrote on this slide here, while universal design ensures the usability of the majority, inclusive designs now fills in the gaps that are left, for the underrepresented groups. Okay, so to end my presentation, I would say that an inclusive built environment should not be a luxury. It shouldn't be something that we look forward to moving to a developed world or moving to a better city for, because it's seen as, oh, my socioeconomic situation has improved, so I should have a more inclusive building design. It should be a necessity for everyone and for any sustainable society. And this has to do with designing spaces that gives everyone the ability, an equal chance to have to living a good life. And that way we'll create cities that are more connected. There are no stratifications or divisions, a city that is more resilient and also future proofing. So like I said here, an inclusive built environment should be a place that welcomes everyone by design, as the first thought. So yeah, thank you. I think that's all from me.
Thank you, Professor Rashid. That was excellent presentation. Well, let me open the floor for discussion, comments, and questions. So if you don't mind taking down your screen, we can see
Yeah.
all the participants.
I'm trying to. Yeah.
Well, from our audience, if you have any questions, please let us know. I see Professor Gurgun has joined us from Turkey. Hi, Asli. Would you like to start with your question?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. It's very good to be here to listen to these different perspectives from different colleagues. Thank you for the organization. I have heard it on LinkedIn and just checked the date and time. And I just, I was amazed that I learned it just 1 hour before before the organization. So it's a pleasure for me to be here and pleasure to listen to all these valuable contributions. I don't have a question, but maybe I might open, as you suggested, a floor for a discussion. For example, about inclusivity. Dr. Rashid has successfully presented. I was wondering how this inclusivity can be encouraged. As a civil engineer or an engineer, I'm thinking with different levels, like project level, construction sector level, municipality or authority level, different levels, exist to encourage or just push these implementations into the industry. So Are there any suggestions or real-world applications or regulations existing somewhere to encourage these inclusivity, implementations into the projects? Maybe stakeholders can be encouraged in some way. I don't know. I mean, so I would like to learn these opinions if there are any, implementations or not. Thank you.
Thank you. For instance, I can talk about New Zealand here. So New Zealand has a very strong or very evident cultural connection. You might have heard of the Maori cultural beliefs and so. So one of the ways that inclusivity, because the indigenous practices, which you all know, indigenous cultural practices has a lot to do with environmental sustainability, inclusivity, especially when it comes to the design of our spaces, our houses. There is this deep connection to not just the environment, but also individuals, to you and I, there seems to be a deep connection when it comes to how our buildings are designed. Traditionally and culturally, they tend to encourage connectivity, interaction, which is a bit distant now from the modern houses we have. So in New Zealand here, in the city where I live, in Auckland, we've got the Maori design principles, and it has like 7 principles, which buildings and mostly private, or if I may say mostly public and large-scale projects have to abide by or have to depend on in order to achieve any construction that they want. So one of the expectations of the design principles is having making use of local practices, having an integrated design approach where different stakeholders in the industry have to come together and agree. And one of the important stakeholders there will be the iwi group, because they have, they know the environment better. They know, in order to preserve the cultural significance of the place. And usually when these projects, take this integrated approach and, take a lot from the indigenous concept, you find that these projects are more inclusive of a lot of people, of the different groups or diverse users. So that's one of the examples I can give. Just the research I've done, which I don't have a personal experience in, is I heard in Canada, some of the laws have also been changed to capture the needs of migrants. I think that's for intergenerational housing. Their needs, the cultural expectations they have in order to be able to live in houses. Some of the laws or policies have been adjusted to accommodate that. So
Thank you.
Thank
to
you.
answer your question, I think it first of all starts with policy, the policy, and then it streams down to stakeholders. If I can add something, there is this, I was having a conversation with a professor in Australia, and one thing we've come to realize that clients and users tend to set the pace for directly or indirectly for the type of houses that are designed. So when we educate clients and users more on the need or the importance of inclusivity, I think the change also can be a lot quicker. Thank you.
Thank you, Zeku, and thank you, Ashley, for opening that discussion. Sylvia, do you have anything to add to that? Or we can move on to the next question.
We can move to the next because we have this wonderful expert here that answered the question. And
Okay, great.
I agree completely.
So we have received a number of questions, and so let me start with one of the first questions that come up. I think Michael Bishop had posed this question about, that architectural trends are moving more towards AI applications, and you touched upon that as well. So the question is, what kind of AI applications can tools be developed
Yeah.
that can identify impact on the SDGs by just the design choices that are being made. How can we tie AI architectural design to help us in achieving the SDGs, or at least pointing out to individual users, architects, that
Mhm.
this is the impact, good or bad.
Okay. We are now doing some research on the matter. We are starting some projects about the AI implementation in the design management process that I guess will help some of there's I would say very, very important questions that Michael addressed. But in the moment, what I see is the AI application for design in architecture, construction, needs to have, very huge data bank. So the data bank to really improve architectural solutions is not easy to build. For example, one single office or one single firm will not have all the data that is needed to AI work. Now, what we have is not really capable of improve the SDGs addressing in the design. But I hope that in maybe 2-3 years, something like that, it will start to be feasible. In my opinion, to arrive at this condition of application of AI application, we need to work together, not each each firm, each individual, or each office, or each contractor, or each university. And it's a kind of a very, very big deal with all the interested parties to build something that can be a huge data bank. Because in fact, artificial intelligence is not something that will create something good from nothing. It works with something that is established to after create solution. So we need to start now to have some years this source of data to work with. Till then, in my opinion, what we have is some tools, AI tools that can improve, the productivity. Yeah, because we can do something faster. A lot of things can be faster with AI, but it's not an improvement of the sustainability or the quality indicators themselves. Is something in terms of make it is faster, the same things. So more like same that we have that is not really sustainable, but faster. So if you think about it, maybe is not improving. It's just something that clients can appreciate, because we can give the clients solutions in terms of design much faster, but they are not better.
Thank you, Silvio. Yeah, there's always a worry about garbage in, garbage out when you're talking about
Exactly.
artificial
I
databases.
agree completely. This kind of garbage that we are surrounded by a lot of.
Indeed. And let me open to the audience if anybody has any comment to make, or Michael, did your question get answered? Or if you have a rebound, open your mic and raise that question.
Yes, the question was definitely answered. I know, we're not quite there yet. You got to build up some database and some information until we get there, but definitely a promising avenue. Thank you.
Thank you. Audience, questions? I cannot see everybody, but raise your electronic hand, and I'll spot you there. Yes, Isaku, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I do want to ask a question. I want to follow up on this because Silvio, I've always wanted to ask people, and I always ask people, the problem with digital tools, is it that we're unable to create a larger data base, or is it because at this stage the possibilities of digital tools are unknown so much that people are not confident in sharing information? Or is it because of the limitations of digital tools that we're not able to create a bigger or larger database that could benefit construction activities?
I agree with your point. Information sharing is challenging in the construction industry. So we need to show people the advantage of information sharing to help the development of the tools isn't really necessary to all kind of improvement that we really share information to have a better results. In my opinion, it is a kind of fallacy that culturally we have this kind of reasoning. Oh, well, we cannot share information. This is confidential, and so on. But is a kind of fallacy because sometimes what I consider as confidential is exactly the same that my neighbors are doing, my competitors are doing. So information sharing is great. That's my opinion.
Thank you. Yes, Ashley, go ahead, please.
Thank you. In addition to what Dr. Mehado explained about, confidentiality, I think data management is also another important concept in regards with artificial intelligence, because lots of stages: data collection, structuring, gathering, cleaning, various steps. So I believe it's partly related to understanding that we need a set of data or many sets of data, but they're not random. We need to collect them, with a structured mind, in a structured path, in order to, evaluate, analyze, and produce some valuable information or products out of it. So I just wanted to mention data management, the importance of it.
Absolutely. Good point. Haley, you had a question. You want to go ahead and ask yourself, or I can read it for you?
Actually, after listening the presentation, my question quite shifted a little bit. I have a question to Dr. Rashid. So you pulled up a presentation about the equity, and when we discussing about equity, like the people to consider and their circumstances can be like very greatly different. And then, are there be any computational method like suggested to optimize those needs? Because back in the days, I thought, as far as I know, most are based on surveys or discussions. So to optimize the building design or the location, would there be any computational like analysis, like reinforcement learning suggested like nowadays?
So the innovative approaches that I'm aware of that's happening now is revitalizing the concept of building performance analysis. And in other words, I know this is a traditional term, but it's coming back again, post-occupancy evaluation. It's becoming more digitalized, which is important. That way, you know, diverse users become more evident, more, their needs are documented, and not just the needs of the greater majority. For instance, I've been working on, I know there are other building performance monitoring tools out there, like the BUS, we have like the BOSSA and so on. So there is, like, for my design group or my research group, we have built a form of a database, and it will interest you that when you look at the data, and because now we're becoming more aware of the importance of inclusivity, so we are now trying to identify those needs that are originally not considered because they are the minority. So to answer your question, I don't know of any statistical computation, that can produce that. But I do know that innovations in the industry is seeing the re-emergence of post-occupancy evaluations as an important aspect of the building process. In fact, now there is the argument that facility managers who manage the buildings should be brought into the design phase of buildings, because they manage these buildings, they interact more with the users, they have more knowledge on the different diverse users and their specific needs, which architects, designers who are just designing the buildings might overlook. So these are some of the innovative concepts that are happening now, which maybe with the use, maybe Silvio might know some digital tools that help.
Now, I would like just to add that I agree completely. Your approach is good, but it's not so new. This we are talking about here is about concurrent design, and this is something that is conceptualized in the beginning of the 2000s, so maybe 20 years. The only thing that with digital tools, we have a much more possibility of improving the concurrency, because what is the idea? You need to really have, the experience, the feedback of the experience during all the life cycle. So the concept is not new. The difficult is huge. But with digital tools, we are seeing, I would say, a path to arrive and to do it, but need to think about how kind of contracts we have, because sometimes as academics, they think about a lot of cooperation, a lot of collaboration, but nobody will collaborate if it is, written. You are supposed just to deliver a small piece, okay? So deliver it, take your payment, that is not so big, is like this, okay? And do not complain about other things, okay? So sometimes the contract is like that. Okay? But the idea, I completely agree, and we have, some, I would say, hope about it.
Well, let me move the conversation to Professor Widener. There were a couple of things that came up. One was facilities, and the other was data management. Would you like to add your thoughts on that?
Well, I can add a little bit as a member of TC 267, ISO TC 267, and of W 070. It's nice to hear comments that the facility manager needs to be brought into the discussion. I was thinking, as hearing some of the presentation, in the United States for about 35 years, we've had requirements in building codes for accessibility for people who have physical impairments, visual impairments, hearing impairments, and maybe we are jaded in the United States by those requirements because we've been accustomed to it. So are we jaded because other nations, other regions of the world do not have similar requirements in building codes for accessibility?
Well, we have 3 parts of the world represented here, 4 parts actually. So any comments? President
I can
Durgo,
only say
Rashid?
that in Brazil, these requirements are available and they are really, I would say respected in the buildings, but mainly it applies to public buildings and not to all kind of buildings, right?
And I will also say in New Zealand, yes, there are codes. The building code here has those requirements. But like you say, they are mostly, in larger scale projects where you see those things being adhered to the T. I wouldn't say this is what's happening, but there is a possibility that when there is a bit of an allowance, we tend to, just do the needful and just tick the box and move on. I guess my argument is, yes, these laws are there, these policies are there, yes, and the design team or the construction team tends to take the easy way out and just do the needful. But when it comes to inclusivity, some needs and specifications of some of the diverse groups are not actually captured in our building codes and so on. For instance, the needs of migrants, which you might say it's a new, for instance, the multi-generational housing, or the move from open living area and requiring separate living spaces away from. Okay, if I can give a personal example, I had a bit of a culture shock when I moved from my country to New Zealand, seeing that the toilet is in the living space. It's kind of what is what is a visitor's toilet doing in a living space? You kind of have this mental picture that when it comes to such private spaces, they should be zoned away from the public eyes. So this kind of gives an example of me coming from another culture here with my own cultural expectations and preferences, and having to change or adapt or make do with what I have because I have no control with how the buildings are designed.
Thank you. Any additional comments?
Well, I have to agree with Professor's comment that the users of the facility who, or the owner of the facility is going to be driving the change. And that's easy to say because the owner is probably the one paying for it. And if the owner is sympathetic or sensitive to the occupants and their needs, why the change can happen more quickly.
Let me open the discussion to our audience and see if there are any follow-up questions or any questions that you have. You can raise your hand. Well, I have one question from Yeji, and she's asking, Yeji, do you want to ask your question or shall I read it for you?
Thank you, Professor. I can do it by myself.
Okay.
So I have question to Dr. Azaku or Rashid, if I pronounce correctly.
Go ahead.
So yes, I wanted to ask about the biggest challenges in creating an inclusive built environment in New Zealand because and if you are familiar in United States inclusive built environment, if there are differences, could you share them with us?
Thank you. So, I can't talk about New Zealand's situation to the much I know. I don't know about the US. In New Zealand here, one of the issues we have when it comes to balancing inclusivity and sustainability is first and foremost costs. And I would argue that it will be the same problem everywhere. And rightly, just as Ted said and Silvio said, if the client has enough money, is sympathetic, a lot of things can happen. But if not, a lot of things cannot happen. So that is one of the problem because the construction industry, maybe because we have not developed to an extent where these innovative environmental materials or approaches have become mainstream. Most of those materials and so on are expensive. And if those concepts and strategies, that will encourage inclusivity, are costly, the people won't go for it. Another problem we have is with the idea of energy efficiency, which is very much mainstream now. We need to be energy efficient. However, what I've realized is some of the strategies that we take towards energy efficiency kind of limits the ability of diverse users to sufficiently interact with their buildings or achieve personal comfortable preferences. For instance, let's say, for instance, air tightness in buildings. You can, when you make a building very much airtight, you could either depend on HRV and also, to create that ventilation you need. But then you're trying to make sure that you use as little energy use as possible. Without innovative HRV systems that are going on, a good way to do that is the passive means. But then the more you open windows, the more you leave windows open, the more you don't interact efficiently with the buildings, your house tends to negate the impact of air tightness, trying to keep the place warm when required. So trying to balance this, having an energy efficient house as well as having a house that is inclusive to everybody's needs. People might prefer fresh air to recycled air. Fresh air, the people might even prefer the ability to open windows themselves and close doors themselves. It also creates a mental comfort for them, not necessarily that the space has a bad CO2 level or so, but just them having that control, which is what most energy efficient strategies or energy use reduction strategies kind of limits occupants having that control. So those are some of the challenges. Another one that relates again to migrants is space constraint. So, for instance, if you live in a place where you prefer to have a more multi-generational housing, where you have you need more space for that to happen. But these days, in high density cities, that will be impossible will not be possible to happen. So that also one of the challenges when it comes to inclusivity. In all things being equal, it is a good idea, it's a great idea. But when you then begin to look at the practicality of the situation you have, the conditions you have, those create constraints to achieving inclusivity.
Thank you. Thank you, Ajay, for raising that question. I know that Ghanem, you have a question for Professor Melhado. Do you want me to read it or do you want to take it on? All right, Ghanem. But he's asked. Oh, go ahead.
I don't quite remember my question. Just have to pull up the forms. If you could,
I will ask it for you, and you can add it.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So he wants to know, Professor Melhado, that how can emerging trends in sustainable design, such as innovative materials and adaptive reuse, contribute towards UN SDGs?
Oh, yeah. I would say that, of course, it will contribute, but it's not enough because we are talking about, I would say, a disruptive change and not some incremental change. But I can see this incremental change from maybe 30 years now. And we are not really arriving to a much more sustainable, building environment. You are That's the question, in my opinion. You are adjusting performance, innovating in some specific points, for example, materials or systems, etc. But we need to have a much more disruptive approach to address SDGs, really, if you want my opinion. But I say, what you are passionate, yeah, about. So your passion is very important in any kind of contribution. Uh, I prefer, my viewpoint, prefer to take the whole and try to change, the whole picture. But of course, all the contributions are needed. All the contributions are very important for us. Okay.
So just so that I point out to everybody that Professor Milhado has thrown a challenge that we need disruptive innovation to
Exactly.
adapt SDGs or to address SDGs. So that's a very broad question, a very important question indeed. Any other questions from the audience? Any other comments? Yes, go ahead, please, Professor Guggen.
Yeah, thank you. I was wondering, how these applications be affected by the population of the country. Does it matter? I think it matters, but I'm just thinking at the basic level. Is there any further level that you can bring to our attention? Is it important? Because economy is important, number of required buildings is important. As the population goes higher, we need more buildings. So would it be a challenge to manage or put effective of these inclusivity and other, innovations into use in construction industry? Thank you. Just ask it to everyone, maybe.
Silvio Ezeaku, do you want to take that?
This question is something that I can't answer, but is the most important one. So thank you, Atlee. Is very, very difficult to say how we will fight against the reality. The reality is we need to construct, we need to build, but the impact comes with. But something related to, mindsetting can be helpful if you can take, this kind of approach in terms of, can we change the reasoning of people? Because if you have much more people concerned and helping, taking part of all the movement can be very good. But at the moment, I don't have an answer. Sorry.
Yeah, if I can add to that, I also don't have an answer, but I think I'm quite passionate about inclusivity, and I always have this idea that awareness, the more everybody is aware, the more we can, push the change, for the lack of a better word, push the change, if every client requires as a minimum certain expectations of a building design. certain expectations of how our public system should be, public spaces. I think that would help. And the only way we can continue is having these conversations and, bringing people together and trying to, make, stimulate our minds, in all these issues. Yeah. But hopefully one day, I'm sure an answer would come up.
Sorry, one point that I would like to add, if you the decision taking is something that we need to change, and we are trying to, map all the points of decision taking in the design process in terms of sustainability impact. There are, I don't know, maybe hundreds of points of decision taking that can change or would change to improve the result in terms of sustainability. And we are trying to map to work with this kind of thing, because, of course, after having this mapping of the process, we can propose some tools. That's the approach that I am really applying. For example, if we can identify who and when is taking the decisions and how, and we can change the tree when, who, and how, with, of course, using technology. It can, at the end, give us some disruptive situation, disruptive result, I guess.
Well, I'm looking at the time, and this has indeed opened up a lot of good discussion. So in the few minutes that we have left, let me take my last questions. I always try to do that. So I have one question for each of our panelists. So Sylvia, let me start with you. So, in all this conversation, cost always comes up, right? So how does one balance between the cost of implementing sustainable design, or even to address the SDGs from different point of view? How would you, what are your thoughts on architectural design and cost compromise as far as SDGs are concerned?
Yeah, it's a very good point. I believe that cost is always an issue all the time, of course, and everybody knows that. We try to approach it as the life cycle cost and not the construction cost itself, because construction cost sometimes can be higher, I agree. But even so, the construction cost can be also reduced if we really improve the design process. And sometimes it's a cultural, factor here. There is a cultural factor, like we need to finish the design stage very fast, because the most important thing is start construction and deliver the facility. So maybe we are not doing everything we are really capable of delivering. We can deliver a much better design solution and much better sustainable solution. So it can be a good approach to, give much more value to design phase, and of course, think about cost of the life cycle to justify the changes and the improvements. That's what I think.
Thank you, Silvio. Isaac, let me ask you my last question then. And that is that, we are talking about architectural design trends, which also consider age and place. And you mentioned a little bit about that as well. Touching upon, of course, disabled individuals, older adults. So how can these designs consider the sustainable development goals while responding to inclusive and universal, to use the two phrases that you mentioned?
So one of the ways that we are exploring, it's not a new concept, but is this integrated approach to the development of any projects, and that is having a client representative or an occupant representative within the team. Mainly because facility managers, yes, do their job. They are brought in early enough in the design of buildings, but also it's good to do the background work or the investigation, or have a representative within the team. That's something we are exploring, mainly because we've had situations where we depend on the building codes that give us a generic or holistic view of the situation. But in actual fact, the situation tends to differ when when it becomes practicable, in practice. There is a theory and there is the practice that happens when the building has been designed. And so in my opinion, an integrated approach that brings every stakeholder, direct and indirect, to the table for them to identify their expectations and their needs would be a good way to go. Silva, you are more experienced in this, so what can you add to it?
You explained it perfectly. So I agree with each word.
Great. Well, thank you both very much. I really appreciate you participating in this panel discussion. And thank you, Professor Gurgut and Professor Widener, for your contributions. This has been an exciting panel discussion, and I hope we have opened a dialogue and the need for research and disruptive innovation, as Professor Milhado mentioned, that has indeed opened the discussion for sustainable development goals and the role of built environment. So with that said, please look forward to another seminar, another panel discussion coming up next week. We'll have this semester, every week we'll have these panel discussions, sort of paving the path towards the World Building Congress, the theme of which is the role of built environment in addressing sustainable development goals. So thank you again for our panel and our participants, and all of those who are coming from different parts of the world. And we look forward to catching with you again next week. Thank you all. Bye.